good night sleep, Watkins, lad.
Full search.
Ian Watkins was once one of the biggest names in British rock music. As the frontman of Lost Prophets, he performed to packed arenas, sold millions of records worldwide, and helped turn the Welsh band into one of the most commercially successful rock acts of the 2000s. But in 2013, everything collapsed when he admitted to a series of vile offences that horrified the public and effectively erased his career overnight. I can't really be very specific on what he did, but chances are you already know. It's bad. He was sentenced to 29 years in prison, followed by an extended license period, with the judge describing the offences as having plunged into new depths of depravity. The crimes made Watkins one of the most despised prisoners in Britain, and from the day he entered custody, prison authorities knew his safety would become a constant concern. Like other offenders convicted of crimes of that kind, Watkins spent much of his sentence under strict protection. This type of offender occupies the lowest position within the unofficial hierarchy inside British prisons. That reality followed Watkins throughout his imprisonment. In January 2014, he was transferred to HMP Long Lartin, partly to be closer to his mother after she underwent a kidney transplant. He was later moved back to HMP Wakefield, one of Britain's highest security prisons, where many of the country's most dangerous offenders are held. Even there, segregation and monitoring could not eliminate the risks surrounding him. His imprisonment continued to generate controversy. In 2017, reports emerged alleging that Watkins had attempted to groom yet another mother through letters sent from prison. The allegations prompted outrage and renewed questions about how such communications had been allowed to take place. Then, in 2018, prison officers discovered Watkins in possession of a mobile phone. He denied it belonged to him, claiming other inmates had forced him to hide it, and that he feared violent retaliation if he identified them. A court rejected his explanation, and he received an additional 10-month prison sentence. Things did not magically get better for him after this point. On the 5th of August 2023, Watkins was taken hostage by 3 inmates inside HMP Wakefield. During the 6-hour ordeal, he suffered sharp impacts before specialist prison officers were able to intervene. Although his injuries were not considered life-threatening, Watkins later claimed he had suffered bleeding on the brain and permanent spinal nerve damage as a result of the attack. The incident reinforced what prison officials already knew. Despite extensive protective measures, keeping such a notorious prisoner alive would always be an enormous challenge. Just over 2 years later, those fears became reality. On the morning of the 11th of October 2025, prison staff responded to reports of another serious assault inside HMP Wakefield. This time, Watkins had been attacked inside his own cell. He suffered multiple sharp impacts to the head and neck, and his time was called at the scene. He was 48 years old. Police immediately launched a murder investigation. 2 serving prisoners, Rashid Rico Geddel and Samuel Dodsworth, were later charged with his murder. Prosecutors alleged that Geddel entered Watkins' cell, carrying a makeshift weapon before jabbing at him several times, while Dodsworth disposed of the weapon afterwards. The homemade weapon was later recovered from a prison refuse area. When the case reached court, body-worn camera footage revealed a striking picture of the moments after the attack. Jurors heard that Geddel appeared calm and even smiled while speaking to prison officers. According to prosecutors, he remarked that people die every day, before complaining that he wanted to return to his Sudoku puzzle. At another point, he reportedly joked about the officers searching for the weapon, saying they would never find it. Geddel later claimed he had wanted to be moved away from the prison wing that housed SOs, and had chosen Watkins because he occupied the neighbouring cell. He told the jury that part of him had wanted to kill Watkins, while another part had not, describing an internal conflict between what he was thinking and what he ultimately did. The jury, however, failed to reach verdicts, leading to its discharge in May 2026. A retrial was subsequently scheduled. Watkins' demise also drew attention to wider problems inside HMP Wakefield. Just weeks before the attack, an inspection had warned that violence inside the prison had increased markedly, with many prisoners, particularly older men convicted of the worst kind of offences, reporting that they no longer felt safe. Former prison governor Ian Atchison described Watkins as a prisoner whose extreme notoriety meant the risks against him had always been obvious. Ian Watkins spent more than a decade under constant protection, survived one serious attack, and lived knowing he was one of Britain's most hated prisoners. Actually, he'd have known that he was one of Britain's most hated men in general. In the end, despite every security measure put in place, the prison system failed to prevent the outcome it had spent years trying to avoid. What we have here, and what we have in many similar situations, is simply one monster taking out another. In December 2003, Ian Huntley was convicted of murdering schoolgirls Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman after luring them into his home in Soham, Cambridgeshire. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, later receiving a minimum term of 40 years, eventually reduced to 35 on appeal. His crimes made him one of the most despised prisoners in modern British history, and from the moment the prison gates closed behind him, many inmates believed the courts had not gone far enough. What followed was more than 20 years of violence, isolation, legal battles, and repeated attempts on his life, ending only when another prisoner finally succeeded where others had failed. Inside the British prison system, offenders who target children occupy the absolute bottom of the inmate hierarchy. They are routinely placed on vulnerable prisoner units or held in segregation because prison authorities know they are at constant risk of attack. Huntley spent much of his sentence separated from the general prison population, often housed on healthcare wings or under protected status. Even then, officers knew that every movement outside his cell carried significant danger. Despite those precautions, Huntley repeatedly became the target of prisoners who believed they were delivering their own form of justice. One of the earliest attacks came on the 14th of September 2005, while Huntley was being held at HMP Wakefield. Convicted spree killer Mark Hobson threw boiling water over him while he was on the prison's healthcare wing. Huntley suffered scalding injuries serious enough that he was unable to attend the hearing, where the High Court imposed his minimum tariff. Public sympathy was almost non-existent. Many newspaper readers openly celebrated the attack, while prison officials were instead forced to examine how such a vulnerable prisoner had once again been assaulted under their supervision. Rather than accepting the attack as simply part of prison life, Huntley claimed the authorities had failed in their duty to protect him. He sought compensation, arguing that prison staff knew he was a high-risk target and had not taken sufficient precautions. Legal aid was reportedly granted to help pursue the claim, provoking widespread public anger that taxpayer money could be used to support Britain's most notorious offenders. For his various attacks, he was looking to sue for £20,000 to £100,000. He didn't win. 3 years later, Huntley was transferred to HMP Frankland, one of Britain's highest security prisons. The move did little to improve his safety. On the 21st of March 2010, convicted armed robber Damien Folkes launched what prosecutors later described as a determined attempt to kill him. Folkes had fashioned 2 homemade weapons, including a razor blade melted onto the handle of a plastic utensil, motivated by what he described as his hatred of offenders with crimes like Huntley. He chased Huntley through the prison healthcare wing before cornering him. Huntley managed to briefly escape by throwing a bedside table at his attacker, but not before Folkes slashed his throat. The wound measured approximately 7 inches across the left side of Huntley's neck and required 21 stitches. Huntley spent several days in hospital recovering. As prison officers restrained Folkes, he reportedly asked, "Is he dead? I hope so." When told Huntley had survived, he allegedly replied, "I wish I had." During sentencing, prosecutors explained that Folkes had specifically targeted Huntley because of his crimes. The judge imposed a minimum 20-year term for the attempted murder, but also made an important point that reached far beyond the case itself. Regardless of who the victim was, prisons could not allow inmates to decide who deserved to live or die. Justice, he said, remained the responsibility of the courts, not fellow prisoners. That principle would soon be tested again. Following the attack, Huntley launched another legal action against the Ministry of Justice. This time, reports suggested he was seeking around £20,000 for his injuries alongside substantially larger damages for what he claimed was the prison service's failure to protect him despite years of known threats. He also reportedly explored a separate claim through the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. The prospect of Huntley receiving compensation caused national outrage. Then Justice Secretary Jack Straw publicly stated that the government had absolutely no intention of paying him compensation. Nevertheless, prison officials were still required to defend the claim because the legal duty of care owed to prisoners does not disappear simply because their crimes are abhorrent. It became one of the clearest examples of the uncomfortable conflict between public opinion and the rule of law. To many people, every attack Huntley suffered felt like justice. To the legal system, every successful attack represented a failure of the prison service. Huntley also attempted to opt out on multiple occasions during his imprisonment. Of course, the attempts didn't work. He spent years moving between segregation units, healthcare wings and protected accommodation, rarely able to live among the general prison population. Every transfer required careful planning because officers knew there were prisoners actively looking for opportunities to attack him. For more than 2 decades, those security measures kept him alive. Eventually, they failed. On the 26th of February 2026, while working inside a prison workshop at HMP Frankland, Huntley was attacked once again. Investigators alleged another inmate struck him repeatedly over the head with an improvised metal weapon, causing catastrophic head and facial injuries. Reports suggested tensions had been growing because Huntley had been wearing a Manchester United shirt, resembling those worn by Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, on the day they disappeared, something other prisoners reportedly viewed as deeply provocative. Huntley was rushed to hospital and placed on life support. His mother was reportedly the only person to visit him before doctors withdrew treatment. He died on the 7th of March 2026 at the age of 52. A murder investigation was immediately launched, and convicted murderer and violator Anthony Russell was later charged in connection with his death. The Prison and Probation Ombudsman also opened a formal investigation into how one of Britain's most closely monitored prisoners had once again become the victim of a fatal attack. For many people, Huntley's death marked the final chapter in one of Britain's most infamous criminal cases. Yet, it also reignited an uncomfortable question that has followed his imprisonment for more than 20 years. If a court sentences someone to life imprisonment, is that sentence supposed to be carried out by the justice system alone, or by fellow inmates willing to take matters into their own hands? Huntley's crimes ensured he would never find sympathy, but his years behind bars remain one of the clearest examples of the uneasy line separating lawful punishment from prison revenge.
Jackson County Sheriff's Department, how can I help you, please?
Yes, ma'am. I need to report my daughter missing.
Is she missing or did she run away?
No, she's missing.
And what was she wearing?
She has on a light blue coat, black pants with white stripes.
Okay.
In January 2005, Caitlin Katie Coleman left her home in the small town of Crothersville, Indiana, to buy toilet paper from a nearby store. It was an errand that should have taken no more than half an hour. Instead, she disappeared without a trace. 5 days later, her body was discovered in a creek, roughly 15 miles away. An autopsy concluded that she had been essayed and drowned. Her killer, Anthony Ray Stockelman, eventually pleaded guilty to murder and violations, receiving a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For most murderers, imprisonment marks the end of the story. For Stockelman, it became the beginning of another. He was transferred to the Wabash Valley Correctional Facility in Indiana, where his crimes quickly became known among the prison population. That was not a good thing for Anthony. In fact, it was a very bad thing. Less than 2 years after arriving in prison, the reality of what he did to Katie would become impossible for Stockelman to escape. On the 19th of September 2006, another inmate named Jared Harris was transferred onto the same prison wing. Harris was serving a sentence for burglary, but he also shared a personal connection to the case that had shocked Indiana 1 year prior. There was one major reason why Stockelman should have been scared. Jared was Katie Coleman's cousin. According to court documents, Harris had already made threats against Stockelman before what happened next. On the 22nd of September, Harris entered the open prison cell Stockelman shared with another inmate and waited. When Stockelman returned, Harris shut and locked the cell door behind them before the other prisoner could enter. Stockelman later told investigators that Harris grabbed him by the throat and presented him with two options. I'm either going to stick you and leave you bleeding, or I'm going to tattoo you. Faced with those choices, Stockelman later claimed he submitted to the tattoo. Using a makeshift tattoo machine built from a cassette deck motor and a sharpened guitar string, Harris carved a permanent message across Stockelman's forehead. In large crude letters were the words, "Katie's Revenge." It covered almost his entire forehead. When Harris finished, he discarded the homemade tattoo gun in a prison bin. Prison officers soon discovered what had happened, and photographs of Stockelman began circulating outside the prison walls, rapidly attracting national media attention. The general reception for what was done to Stockelman was positive. Harris later admitted carrying out the attack because of Katie's murder. During later court proceedings, he testified that he had told Stockelman if he accepted the tattoo, everything would be taken care of, and he would not have to worry about future attacks from other prisoners. Harris also claimed that other inmates had already assaulted Stockelman at his request because of his crimes. Prison authorities saw the incident very differently. Harris was charged with battery and disciplined internally, receiving additional time on his sentence for breaking prison rules. Stockelman, meanwhile, was immediately removed from the general prison population and placed into protective custody to prevent further attacks. The prison also arranged for a medical professional to remove the tattoo free of charge, although the image had already spread widely across newspapers, television, and the internet. The case sparked debate far beyond Indiana. Some argued the tattoo represented a form of justice that Stockelman had earned through his own actions. Others pointed out that prisons are not intended to become places where inmates decide each other's punishments. If prison authorities allow assaults, torture, or permanent mutilation to occur, then the justice system itself begins to lose control. Anthony Ray Stockelman remains in prison, serving life without parole for what he did to Katie. Jared Harris eventually completed his own sentence after additional punishment for the attack. Yet 20 years later, the photograph of those two words, etched across Stockelman's forehead, continues to resurface. Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.